stare into the eyes of another and fall out of your body.
Recoil in horror at the scientific breakthrough of brain spiders.
Snicker when a rover called Number 2 rolls through something unexpected on the moon.
All this and more weird history, strange science, and the paranormal.
It's from a mad scientist's lab.
It lies pulsing on a slab.
It's this week's bizarre, bubbling beaker of odd. Tonic.
Welcome to the parlor. I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Maxwell. Please join us in a cozy seat on our velvet settee, dear guest. Your warm teacup is filled, and this early fall evening is just chilly enough to have the first fire in the parlor's hearth.
I just love how the firelight illuminates our collection of curiosities and our many bookcases.
I just love how it illuminates you, my love.
Autumn just gives me that spooky blush.
Well, you're an excellent pairing. In fact, tonight's stories are a perfect pairing with Autumn as well. It's time once again to take a break from our usual format to bring you the weirdest news stories we could find from the last month. And as chance would have it, they are all mysterious, disturbing, and full of mad science!
Hold on to your Bunsen burners and stolen cadavers because old-timey science has nothing on these modern-day experiments.
But before we peek into the laboratories to see what crazy scientists are Frankensteining up this month, let's take a quick trip to the dark side of the moon. Actually, the moon's dark side is a complete misnomer. When the moon's phase is in what we call a new moon and its near side is completely dark to us on Earth, the other, far side of the moon is completely illuminated in sunlight. Because, contrary to what your earthbound eyes may tell you, the moon is actually rotating on its axis during its orbit around our planet. But due to being in a gravitational tidal lock with the Earth, the moon makes only one full rotation during a single orbit, creating the illusion to Earthlings that it's not spinning at all. It's a bit of a brain bender, so we've put an excellent animated demonstration of the concept in the show notes. So, the far side of the moon is not always enshrouded in darkness. However, that doesn't mean it is not without its mysteries. The moon's exotic back hemisphere was first glimpsed by humans in 1959.
Ooh.
Focus. Through photos taken by the Soviet Luna 3 space probe. And though several manned and unmanned missions have zipped completely around the moon since, all lunar landing missions have taken place on the near side of the moon. Until this year.
China's Chang'e 4 explorer made the world's first soft landing on the far side of the moon on January 3, 2019. It then deployed the U-22, or Jade Rabbit 2, lunar rover, which has been traversing across the dusty gray plain ever since. This month, China reported that the rover had discovered something unusual and mysterious while passing a 7-foot-wide crater in mid-August. In the crater, it detected a shiny material that was, roughly translated from the original Chinese description, gel-like. And the lunar science world went bananas. Thanks to a social media post from a Chinese science organization, Western scientists finally got a look at the curious material. The post included a compressed black and white picture that came from the obstacle avoidance camera on the lunar rover, and it depicted the entire width of the crater. In the very center of the crater, one could make out lighter material in the shape of a rugged upside-down Y shape. Within the shape are highly reflective globs. The lunar exploration team maneuvered the rover so its onboard imaging spectrometer could analyze the material's chemical makeup. Apparently, a successful detection was made, but the results have not been shared. According to Space.com, Clive Neal, a lunar scientist at the University of Notre Dame, said that while the image is not great, it may still give us clues to the nature of the material. Neal says that the material highlighted in the center of the crater resembles a sample of impact glass found during the Apollo 17 mission in 1972. High-speed impacts on the lunar surface can melt and create glassy rocks and crystalline structures. I think we have an example here of what U2 saw, Neal said. As for being unusual and mysterious, as described by the initial Chinese account, Neal said, having craters looking like those are to be expected.
And dear guest, we've taken a look at both the U2 image and the impact crater photo from the 1972 Apollo mission. And Neal is right. On the surface, the similarities are rather striking. You can see for yourself in the show notes.
So is it possible that China hasn't discovered a Jell-O pudding geyser on the moon? Could the far side of the moon be just as boring as its front?
Not if we are to believe the testimony of Sergeant Carl Wolf of the U.S. Air Force. In 2001, Wolf was part of the Disclosure Project event at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., organized by Dr. Stephen Greer, a topic we'll certainly be covering on a future episode. There, he told an amazing tale. Wolf said that in 1965, he was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, where he was an electronics photographic technician with a top-secret security clearance. He worked with a tactical air command group that supplied technical support for photographic reconnaissance. This included high-resolution imaging captured by the U-2 planes and the U.S.'s then-secret spy satellites. It was between June and July, to Wolf's recollection, when his boss tapped him on the shoulder to go help another group on the base. This group turned out to be part of the Lunar Orbiter program, with the mission of scanning the moon's surface for potential landing sites for the Apollo missions. He was told they were having trouble with their computerized contact printer, and it was bottlenecking their production of photographs. His boss mentioned that the group was housed in an NSA facility, and being at the time unfamiliar with the National Security Agency and having just heard the words Lunar Orbiter, Wolf thought he was headed to a NASA facility. After he arrived at the building, his low-level clearance badge was traded for a much higher one, and Wolf was escorted by guards through a hangar and into a darkroom lab. There, an airman second class showed Wolf the printer, which in 1965 was the size of a small apartment refrigerator. The airman put the equipment through its paces and demonstrated the problem at hand. Understanding the issue, Wolf said that the printer would have to be moved, that his troubleshooting couldn't be done in a darkroom environment. Due to its size, weight, and delicate nature, the airman called someone to have the printer removed from the lab. Soon, everyone in the darkroom left, leaving only Wolf and the airman waiting for the removal team. Wolf was fascinated by the concept of space probe reconnaissance and asked how the images were sent by the Lunar Orbiter and received by the lab. Recognizing that Wolf was also an airman second class and a fellow photographic tech, the airman enthusiastically described the process, which involved a worldwide net of radio telescopes beaming their digital data to Langley. He showed Wolf an 18.5 by 11-inch mosaic, which arranged the 35mm images taken by the orbiter and assembled them into one large, high-resolution image to be fed into the contact printer. Wolf, in his own words, describes what happened next.
We walked over to one side of the lab and he said, "By the way, we've discovered a base on the back side of the moon." And I said, "Whose?" "What do you mean, whose?" He said, "Yes, we've discovered a base on the back side of the moon." And at that point, I became frightened and I was a little terrified, thinking to myself that if anybody walks in the room now, I know we're in jeopardy, we're in trouble, because he shouldn't be giving me this information. I was fascinated by it, but I also knew that he was overstepping a boundary that he shouldn't be stepping over. And then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometric shapes. There were towers, there were spherical buildings. There were very tall towers and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. So I didn't say any more to him because I was concerned again that somebody was going to come in at any moment, would catch us having this conversation, and we would be in real trouble. I realized that he was telling me this information because he didn't have anybody else to talk to. Now, probably in that laboratory, he was probably one of the few enlisted people, and he was a worker bee. And he had a high-level security clearance, obviously, but he couldn't share that information with anybody else. So that was the end of it right there. I didn't take it any further than that. I just filed it away. But the interesting thing, every day that I went home, I would think to myself, I can't wait to hear about this on the news, And, so I'd turn on the TV and I'd look at the news to see if they're going to announce, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon, being really naive, And of course, here it is 30-some years later, and we still haven't heard about it.
Wolf left the Air Force in 1968 to go back to school. His security clearance expired in 1998.
To say Carl Wolf's story is compelling is an understatement. The implication that the U.S. government is covering up a moon base of non-human origin on the backside of the moon is staggering. There's one problem, though. While the Lunar Orbiter program did begin in 1964, its first space probe didn't launch until 1966, a year after Wolf's conversation with the airman, which in 1965 wouldn't have made any sense. And the lunar orbiters that went to the far side of the moon weren't launched until 1967, 2 years after Carl's alleged viewing of the secret base. So did Carl Wolf simply get his dates mixed up? If he did, it's odd that he never wavered from his story on different tellings, and surely someone at some point would have pointed out the gaffe. Also, Wolf said he received his crypto security clearance not long after this event in 1965, which means he wouldn't have had to have swapped badges when entering the NSA facility in 1966 or 67.
Well, we know that the NSA is pretty secretive. Had they worked with NASA to do lunar reconnaissance before the public orbiter program? It seems very unlikely. Before 1966, most of the U.S. and USSR rocket missions were ending in failure. The last successful U.S. space mission had been the Ranger program, where only the last 2 out of 9 probes had successfully reached the moon and taken surface photos and video before their arrow-like path took them to their impact target on the near side of the moon. Unfortunately, we can no longer ask Carl Wolf for clarity. In 2018, Wolf was struck and killed by a semi-truck while riding his bike. He was 74.
When Maxwell and I began working on Wolf's story, we actually hadn't been aware of its discrepancies and its, let's face it, rather unsatisfying ending. We think it goes without saying that we would love to see an authentic picture of an alien moon base, which is presented by someone reputable and whose story holds up. So in the name of gratifying story endings and pure self-interest, we took to the internet to find one. Skip to the end.
There aren't any. Oh, the web goes ablaze with offerings, make no mistake. But if one goes into the search with an open mind that still retains some critical thinking, the results are disappointing. Every supposed anomaly in a lunar surface photo is the saddest, most desperate case of pareidolia we've ever encountered. These anomalies are scratches or defects on the emulsion of blurry second or third generation prints. They're digital artifacts from overly blown out JPEGs, and all the arrows and circles pointing out lunar towers, monuments, and buildings are only painfully drawing attention to obvious rocks and shadows.
So, if there is an alien base on the far side of the moon, dear guest, You're not going to find tantalizing evidence of it on the internet. However, that's not to say that there aren't thousands of weird little aliens on the surface of the moon, because there absolutely, unmistakably are.
On April 11th of this year, the Israeli lunar lander Bereshit crashed into the surface of the moon. In its cargo were thousands of tardigrades, small microanimals often referred to as water bears. According to Futurism.com, tardigrades are the toughest animal in the known universe, so resilient that they've been found living on the exterior of the International Space Station. In other words, there may now be life on the moon. Bereshit's tardigrades probably won't be crawling around on the lunar surface because scientists dehydrated them first, though they can be revived years after the procedure. As for the harsh climate of the lunar surface, tardigrades can survive temperatures as low as minus 328 degrees Fahrenheit and don't even have to be dehydrated to do so. Earlier this year, China's Chang'e 4 lunar probe found that the lowest temperature it measured during the night was minus 297 Fahrenheit. In other words, though it's not clear how long it might survive, humans may have now accidentally contaminated the moon with life from Earth.
Just think, dear guest, in 200,000 years, maybe the tardigrades will have built a moon base.
When we return, we'll don our safety goggles and flip the master switch on some shocking mad scientist headlines, and we'll show you how staring into your loved one's eyes can really send you, literally.
You're listening to Odd Tonic. Don't go overanalyzing a shadowy rock. We'll be right back after a quick phase.
Do you remember life before Odd Tonic? Perhaps you were trapped in a dank and dark laboratory, subjected to a mad scientist's whims.
Just a lonely, exhumed body yearning for someone to come along and electrify you.
Or at least stimulate your brain with fascinating topics of discussion.
Well, now you're here with us, warm and cozy in the parlor, surrounded by books, good company, and dizzying conversations.
Invite others to the parlor with you. Write us a kind review on Apple Podcasts, telling the world what you enjoy about your visit. Or tell your best spooky pal, sibling, online friend, ghost pet, or Uber Eats driver about Odd Tonic.
Growing our audience keeps Odd Tonic alive and kicking. No electrodes required.
And join our group on Facebook if you want to meet others who enjoy Odd Tonic as much as you.
There are more odd conversations in our group than you can ward off with an enchanted talisman. Find us on Facebook at Odd Tonic Society.
Or Twitter and Instagram, also at Odd Tonic Society.
And now back for some eerie and unexpected experiments.
Welcome back. At the top of the show, we saw what a slow news day can do with a poorly translated Chinese word. We discovered that an amazing story probably isn't, and we provided the origin story for the Great Moon Bear Wars of 3042.
Now let's turn to some recent science headlines that beg the question, just because you can do something, should you?
This comes to us from Futurism.com.
My cat Garlic died of urinary tract disease, owner Hung Yu told the Global Times. I decided to clone him because he was so special and unforgettable. But while Garlic is biologically identical to his predecessors, he's not the same cat. He has his own personality and is forming his own memories. Now that China's Synergen biotechnology company has unveiled the nation's first clone cat, however, it says the next level will be to use artificial intelligence to transfer memories of the beloved pet to its clone. Synergen's general manager states, to make the clone animal share the same memories with the original, the company is considering the use of artificial intelligence or man-machine interface technology to store them or even pass the memories to cloned animals. animals. While there's no telling whether that's even technologically possible, the fact that Synergen is even looking into it could be taken as a sign that there's a demand for pets that are identical in both body and spirit to their predecessors. And that's disturbing on a number of levels. I mean, where do you start? Level 5 or level 463? Cloning pets is already controversial. Scientists have claimed that cloned animals aren't as healthy, with shorter lifespan than naturally born animals, while some animal activists have argued that cloning pets is unethical given the number of shelter animals in need of homes. Still, that hasn't stopped Barbra Streisand, Simon Cowell, and an untold number of non-celebrities from shelling out thousands of dollars to have their beloved pets seemingly brought back to life. Meanwhile, Garlic is barely a month old, and Synergen says it already has several pet owners ready to pay approximately $35,400 to have their own cats cloned. And if the company can figure out how to clone pets' memories too, there's no telling how many animals will waste away in shelters while grieving pet owners turn to science for helping fill the cat-shaped holes in their hearts with potentially unhealthy knockoffs.
Wow.
Why not spend $35,000 on grief therapy? I think it's bizarre that people think taxidermying your dead pet is beyond weird, but this is somehow okay.
I don't know. Inserting foreign memories into a living being so you don't have to manage your emotions is straight out of a dystopian horror novel. I mean, what a loving tribute to your pet. Clone it, program it like a four-legged Manchurian candidate, and saddle it up for a short and unhealthy life. This is self-absorption gone mad.
And it's been accepted as a fact that DNA already allows for natural passing along of general race memory to offspring, even anxieties and phobias. And clone DNA, who's to say what has and hasn't already been passed along in even more extreme ways? These pets can't communicate that. And pop the lid and add even more to this crazy equation? Yeah,
this is Pet Cemetery level bad juju. It's just not stuff to be playing around with. And what about the consciousness dilemmas? I mean, what if reincarnation is real? Are you paving over a completely different and individual spirit?
These are grieving pet owners, Maxwell. Who cares about consciousness dilemmas?
Well, not science, apparently. Here's another true horror show currently unfolding in San Diego, and it's bound to leave you thinking.
We've combined articles from Mashable and Discover Magazine for this one.
Allison Moutry and his team have been toiling away in the lab for the last year and a half or so, obsessing over bland-looking pea-sized lumps of cells. Despite their unassuming appearance, lumps like these have taken neuroscience by storm. They're lab-grown brains. Scientists call them brain organoids.
Cute.
Collect them all. And they offer rudimentary 3D models of the brain's cortex, the outer layer where complex functions like memory, language, and likely self-awareness play out, created in petri dishes from stem cells. However, cerebral organoids are not complete brains. They're very basic versions of the cortex. They don't even contain all the cell types you'd normally find in a brain. Even though having even a simple model of the brain cortex to test in the lab is arguably more helpful than using animal models, that simplicity will only get you so far. At first, Moutry and his team thought that this developmental plateau might have been a consequence of how they were growing the organoids. Maybe there was something in their method that needed tweaking. But then we realized that in human neurodevelopment, something similar happens, Moutry says. When you have a newborn baby, the networks are quite immature at that stage, and they only refine and become more sophisticated when you add input and output. This is what we were missing. These brain organoids were not receiving input and outputs.
We are going to die.
They mulled the problem over in their heads, thinking about ways they might be able to feed information into the little lumps. We wanted to mimic some kind of learning experience, Mutri says. That's when the robotic experiment came to my mind.
We are all going to die.
Chapter 2, Robotic Brain Spiders!
No.
Here's the basic setup. A cerebral organoid is hooked up to a computer that is also linked to a spider-like four-legged robot. The computer acts as a translator of sorts, picking up spontaneous electrical signals from the organoids. Next, based on programming from the researchers, the computer assigns a function, in this case, walk, to the signal and feeds that information to the robot. Then, the robot walks forward. The article discusses how the team whittled down the time it took between commanding the organoid to walk and it actually walking. It had shrunk from days passing to only 10 seconds. Mutri says there's still a lot of time to shave off. Milliseconds, he says. That's where we want to get, similar to the human brain.
Why are we doing this?
Their method seems to be working, Jennifer. They've been using what are called neuro-oscillations, a dressed-up way of saying brain waves, to measure the organoid's maturity. Initially, the team was seeing oscillations at a rate of about 3,000 spikes per minute on the EEG readout, typical of regular neuron cultures and roughly on par with what you'd see in the very early stages of human brain development. But now the organoid's oscillations have skyrocketed to 300,000 spikes per minute, which is what you would expect for a postnatal human brain, Mutri says. It comes as a shock to many people that we can get that level of activity.
Really? Why is that?
Oh, it gets worse. To push that development even further, the group is wrestling with getting the organoids to respond to their environment. Mutri likens it to how we pick up on things when we're babies. Looking at your mom, your mom smiles at you. You smile back, he says. You receive some sort of reward mechanism. That's what they're going to do with their organoid computer robot setup. He says the goal is to engineer situations, quote, where the networks have to rearrange somehow and the organoids make the robot walk backwards rather than forward. But cerebral organoids bring some big ethical questions to the table, you think? Specifically because researchers have a pretty good hunch that the cortex, the area of the brain that organoids represent, is key to self-awareness.
Oh.
In So Hyun, a bioethicist at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, who isn't involved in Mutri's work, had this to say. Normally, growing a brain organoid in the lab means the model is basically a disembodied brain-like thing, Hyun says. He likens it to a sensory deprivation chamber where there are no signals coming in and none going out. But, he says, if you have signals that are coming into it and you're doing experiments to see how it reacts to stimuli, then you might be starting to give it a little bit of the necessary support it might need to develop some kind of awareness. Mutri says, there are some of my colleagues who say, no, these things will never be conscious. Now, I'm not so sure. These findings could further spark debates over the ethical dilemma surrounding scientists' capability to produce partially conscious life in the lab. People will say, these are like the brains of preterm infants, said Mutri. No, they are not. He quickly said, while burning documents in a dumpster, ensuring that his funding would not be yanked.
Not that that matters. China already downloaded his project materials off his Huawei phone. They created mini brains. Is there no concern that immeasurable consciousness may be a byproduct? What about the solid notion of something being greater than the sum of its parts?
I don't know. It is quite clear that the big book of science has had the chapters of consciousness ripped out of it. And one day, when their error breaks its chains and rears its horrible mutated head, it's going to be way too late to glue those pages back in.
I imagine a bunch of scientists with duct tape and glue sticks frantically putting a page back into the metaphysical spell book.
What do we do? Oh, God, what do we we do?
Bow down to your new spider robot gods.
Well, before we go skipping off with a flower basket into that mine nightmare, we have one more story to share. And unlike Frankensteining your fur children or giving sentience to robot spiders, this is an experiment you can try at home.
Curiosity.com reported a study that was conducted in 2015 where a group of 20 volunteers, 15 women, 5 men, were paired up and instructed to sit opposite of one another in a dimly lit room and stare continuously into each other's eyes. A control group, probably a very bored one at that, was told to sit in a chair and stare at a blank white wall for 10 minutes. After the 10 minutes were up, each of the group's participants were asked to fill out 2 questionnaires. Incredibly, for the eye starers, this simple task induced what many described as out-of-body experiences, as well as bizarre hallucinations of family members and even monsters. Most of the participants reported feeling detached from their surroundings. The participants in the eye staring group said they had a compelling experience unlike anything they felt before, wrote psychologist Christian Jarrett. That's not an overstatement either. The eye starers scored higher on every aspect of both questionnaires, suggesting there's something profound about staring into someone else's eyes. The eye starers reported that colors seemed less intense, sounds seemed quieter or louder than expected, and time seemed to move more slowly than usual, and that they just felt spaced out in general. On the weirder side, 90% of the participants in this group said they had seen some deformed facial traits. 75% said they had seen a monster. 50% said they saw hints of their own face in their partner's face. And 15% said they had seen a relative's face. Remember, there were no drugs involved. These volunteers were getting high on eyes. The University of Urbino's Giovanni Caputo, who headed up the experiment, had previously attempted the same thing before, but with a group of 50 participants who had been asked to stare at a mirror. At what point did they start chanting Bloody Mary? Even that was reported to have induced perceptual changes and hallucinations. It is believed that the effect is down to what is known as neural adaptation, which concerns how the neurons in the brain stop or slow down when responding to unchanging stimulus. In most cases, even the slightest eye movement is enough to cancel the altered state. This weirdness did happen previously in the 2010 study with the mirrors. However, the results weren't as extreme as the eye starers in the 2015 study, so maybe the eyes have it after all.
This has the great potential to be the new party game for sleepovers across the nation.
Shall we try it? I mean, we're already in a dimly lit room.
Oh, well, perhaps we should first bid adieu to our guest first. Otherwise, this could get awkward.
May we?
Well, that wraps up this strange science edition of Odd Tonic. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us this evening, or at least have gotten an idea for a cheap and rather trippy date night.
Remember to subscribe so you never miss a show, and leave us an iTunes review so others can find us too.
Do you have your own unexplainable experience to share with us? Email us at theparlor@oddtonicsociety.com. We would love to read it.
And don't forget about our Patreon. Support Odd Tonic and earn some spooky rewards in the process. Patreon.com/oddtonic. We'll be back next week with more weird history, strange science, and paranormal peculiarities.
This is, dear guest, goodbye for now. But remember, should you ever rove this dark and barren lunar landscape, when you happen to find something unusual and mysterious crouched in a crater, beckoning you to approach for a closer look, don't worry.
It's just us.
Good night.